Wizardos Groom asked us to write something for Teach Peace, a cultural event organized at SLIA, Second Life Endowment for the Arts, a virtual place in the metaverse. Unfortunately, we were not able to prepare this text in time for that event, yet now it exists. For several years we tried to write a novel titled My Apocalypse, but we could only accumulate pages and pages of notes without any internal coherence. A small part of that material found its place in this text, which is halfway between a short story and an essay. Writing this text helped us to better understand some substantial aspects of today's world. We hope you too enjoy it and that it'll help you to reflect upon these things. This English translation was possible with the help of some friends, and especially Adra and Edmund Brooke. Special thanks to them. The Forest of Peace, an essay in form of short story. The concept of progress is a protective mechanism that defends us from the terrors of the future. Frank Herbert in June. We are never alone. Seneca, Questiones Naturalis. Jesus answered, "If you want to be perfect, go, sell your possessions and give to the poor, and you will have treasures in heaven. Then come, follow me." When the young man heard this, he went away sad, because he had great wealth. Matthew 19, 21-22. Chapter 1. A white coating disease.
It was still big, green, imposing, majestic. She had seen the great oak so many times, especially in the years before, when she drove her children to school in a nearby town every Saturday, or when she drove back to bring them home a few hours later at the end of the worked week. The oak tree dominated that piece of the landscape, even though its roots must have been damaged by the plow while it was working in the field close to the tree. People were too busy to work in the field to take care of the oak. Furthermore, they thought the tree was unchangeable, eternal, and indestructible. The oak was still there, in the countryside, near a little road that wound its way through the fields, connecting small ancient villages. The road was covered in white gravel and black tarmac, following the edges of the fields as if to pay homage to the hard work of the farmers. Standing tall in the middle of the field, it was a symbol of something that endures despite everything, a testament to the strength of its hard wood. She, the oak, was tough, strong, and resilient. But there was more to it. Actually, even in early summer, as you got closer, you could clearly see the white disease spreading through almost all the leaves. It was almost covering them, making them lose their dark but bright green color and giving the leaves a grayish color. The leaves were still green, but not as healthy as they should be. Diseased. A type of mold called powdery mildew had spread into the living wood and stained the great tree with its evil. It had a negative effect on the tree, both in terms of how it looked and how strong it was. Evil, it compromised the tree, aesthetically, but substantially. That oak tree was like her world. Seen from afar, it was the same as before. It was the same world. Looked at more closely, it was paler every day, insipid. Grey with little color, dirty as if dusty, ill unto death, ill of dying. Boccaccio masterfully described the horror of the Black Death and its terrible repercussions in the very fabric of post-medieval society. At the dawn of the Age of Money, when the solid certainties conveyed by the whole monks were fading away, others, more or less inspired by this atrocious reality, had derived disturbing novels and stories from it. She thought, for example, of Poe and his red mask and the horrible deathly contagion he described. But this time everything was quite different. The new pandemic came from the East, from China, like almost every epidemic in living memory that had finally reached Europe with its load of fear, of insecurity, of terror, of death. The new virus came from Asia to Europe and then all over the world. The new, latest pandemic traveled every road, and chasing humanity everywhere, bringing fear, death, anxiety. This world became smaller and smaller. Vehicles, ships, aeroplanes, and finally the powerful worldwide global network of relationships made possible by the media and the magnificent World Wide Web had united the whole earth in a single, unprecedented context. Every piece of news, as well as every lie, traveled as fast as thought, spreading everywhere and adding disquiet to disquiet in a huge cloak that could imprison every thinking mind, even to the point of spreading evil everywhere. Thus, alongside the pandemic, a further grayness, a new and wide grief had taken over the world, like a rush of despair that caged everything and everyone, each man and each woman. No ideology, no culture, no religion seemed able to generate any antidote. A white pain, never really overt and evident, a whitish mold, had infiltrated the living tissue of all humanity, riding side by side with that strange and unprecedented lung-killing virus. A white pain, impalpable and difficult to define, amplified the deadly effects of the pandemic immeasurably, while taking advantage almost without resistance of a baby already desperate humanity, desperate that is hopeless. Not the concrete and material terror of the Black Plague, not the romance of the Red Death, but something all-embracing and soft was destroying men and women from within. No purulent source on the bodies. The white sickness was striking inside the whole mankind, in the depths of a humanity that became weak and incapable of reacting. The white sickness struck deep inside human generations, dedicated to mutual abuse and the pursuit of pleasure, in spite of the dramas of their neighbors. Really, this behavior was similar to the noblemen of Boccaccio and Poe won and affected generations of isolated individuals. It killed the humanity of man. It killed women from the inside. It made the children sad and unable to live. The great sick oak tree was now a contemporary metaphor and a synthetic image of the world.
Chapter 2: The Desperation.
We thought everything would get better and better. We were sure of it. Technology was meeting unimaginable goals, which almost every day went beyond expectations and fantasies. Medicine was now conquering every disease. The economy, by implicit laws of the market, eventually could only grow, at least in Europe and the West. Wars had been gone for decades. God himself had been set aside as having become useless because man's power was unlimited. Almost incomprehensibly, pockets of poverty still existed in the world, but a solution would be found. Equally incomprehensible was the persistence of pockets of genuine religiosity, but for those two a solution would be found. It was at that point that the world ended. When did it happen? How did it happen? When did it begin? How? Why? Who was to blame for it? Well, it was not something quick or flamboyant, like a flash of lightning in the light, or a roar of a thunderstorm on an otherwise clear summer afternoon. No, it was not a striking event. No earthquake disrupted the planetary topography. No asteroid vaporized rock in the skies and decreed the extinction of mankind. No one saw the angels break ancient seals. It was like a slow but inexorable progression into the darkness of sleep. In the absence of thought, in total irresponsibility, in the absurd, in the absurdity of the dream. Something dusted everything and everybody with grayness. Something gradually but inexorably removed color from us. Our days became less savory, our acts less tasty, and the more we became aware of this, the more the process accelerated, since it changed our way of life and the very reason for living. For our involved and bond-free culture, changing our lifestyle, changing the very reason for living, was no longer an option. Progress cannot be stopped. It does not stop. There is no going back, not into the darkness of the past. There were, of course, many events and countless premonitory signs of the end, but hardly anyone, no man and no woman, noticed them. Almost none of us noticed them. It was simply that we, the people, all the people, almost all the people, or almost all the people, no longer had the will to live. We no longer had the will to live, and dreams had taken the place of dominance or over reality. Our existences had often been relegated to angry absurdity. Of course, the situation was more complicated. We lived in the so-called Western civilizations. There were people thought to be the elites of the entire world. That was not totally wrong. People for many years overcome the horrors of the most terrible wars ever known to mankind and were now living well off. We had living really well. We had living, for the most part, more than decently. People were very well off. They owned practically everything in a kind of paradise on earth. Finally, after millennia, we freed ourselves from the nightmare of uncertain survival. Paradoxically, this brought about the end, and in the irresistible advance of the ultimate outcome, a curious and substantial aspect was the replacement of hope with desire and the rise of senseless rage. Hope is dictated by need and more generally by desire, by an existential restlessness that always wants us to be better, an impetus that always wants us to go further. Hope, therefore, points far away, beyond the horizon, beyond self and all that one can do or can think of doing or even imagine. Hope is proper to those who are not satisfied, to those who see their limits and the evil of which they are capable and therefore yearn for more. Hope is proper to those who yearn for something perhaps not well defined, but which they imagine to be beautiful and, in any case, better than the present. Better than the present self. No, sorry. I try to say it better. Better than the present self, that is more self. Closer to how one should be and not how one is. And if it points to something else, then hope implies the possibility of a path. Hope implies the existence of a place to go, to a state to yearn for, a meaning to adhere to. Hope, in fact, requires the perception of a meaning, of a purpose of being. Hope rests on the perception of lack. Hope rests on poverty. Revisiting these thoughts, she was reminded of a work by a friend, an artist by the name of Milena Carbone. A semi-nude woman, seen from behind, was kneeling on a sort of crumbled wreck, badly spread out on a dingy grey floor in a squalid room with grey walls. The only stained color of a different hue, if you can call it that, was a dead black bird near a corner on the floor. In front of the woman was a kind of window, at any rate, a rectangular opening in the wall, beyond which she could see a characteristic Tuscan landscape, green, gently undulating, with rows of cypress trees, a bright, colorful landscape dense with pleasing detail. A blue sky seemed to project itself into the cramped and miserable room, invading it. The woman was evidently staring at that landscape, and the title of the work was I Know Exactly Where I Want to Go. A poor human being with nothing who wishes to have everything, not to possess it, but to see beauty. Your work has a violence all its own. It draws you in, takes you into the intimacy of that girl. Milena clarified. It is more a way to be free than to desire everything, she replied. Is it really that different? The only way to possess reality is to be poor, I dare say, to be a virgin. It's like with true love. To possess is to destroy. But to truly possess and enjoy, you have to give, not just receive. Wealth, on the other hand. Jesus said, "Go, sell everything you have and give to the poor, and you will have treasure in heaven. Then come, follow me." At this, the man's face fell. He went away sad because he had great wealth. The young man went away sad because he was rich. Hope was close to him. He already had everything. His little was everything to him, and that everything was enough. However, it is necessary to emphasize an essential aspect. Possessing goods in itself is not an evil. The poverty he was thinking of is understood as not being dominated by the possession of goods, not being dominated by one's own abilities and self-concept, not to be dominated by self-sufficiency. Poverty, therefore, in this sense, closely resembles humility as much as wealth closely resembles presumption. Wealth inflates and at the same time blinds. It cuts off the future, leaves room almost only for a downward glance turned inward. Thus, life withers away and an almost irresistible gap opens up for envy, jealousy. Thus, an opening for senseless rage, an opening for cravings indeed, for cravings that become demands, which arouse arrogance, which call therefore for violence, because I am entitled to have everything. If the ultimate meaning of what we do is inscribed in our capacities and possibilities alone, if there is no place other than ourselves, then there can be no perspective, because in order to move, we must go from one point to another. And if this other is not there, better if it is not perceived. There is no path, there is no movement. One survives biologically in a kind of stasis that is actually darkness disguised as light, which is dream and illusion because reality is infinitely more complex than our claim to understand it suggests. Because man, however, is in fact poor and unable to satisfy himself. Because man, as easy as to see, is steeped in evil. Many people, in fact, were still immersed in poverty and need, and yet we, more fortunate at least on a material level, struggled to understand their enormous hardship and considered ourselves okay, satisfied. Our life, in fact, sank every day into an abyss of futility. It was indeed meaningless and therefore hopeless. It was simply desperate. It was losing color as if pervaded in a white disease. Hence, it sank into the dream, where it sought alternative truths in which we were sufficient to ourselves. From the dream, in turn, our consciousness would bounce artificially back into reality, confusing the two planes and generating irresponsibility and madness. We began more and more to resemble spoiled children whose only desire, not infrequently violent, is for new toys, because I'm entitled to have everything. The omnipotence of the dream became a delirium of irrationality and irresponsibility exported to real life. After all, we know this for a long time, as Seneca said.
We are always laying commands upon ourselves, to our own dis-peace. We suffer at one moment from love of, another from weariness of ourselves. Our unhappy soul is now inflamed with pride, now inflated with passion. Sometimes we relax it through indulgence, sometimes we consume it with anxiety. The most pitiable thing of all is that we are never alone with ourselves. So, where such a crowd of vices have to mess together, there must be continual wrangling amongst them.
You're in your car, on the ring road. Do they pass you on the right? You insult them and speed up, then cut across the road. Does your wife have the audacity to ask for your help, disturbing your daily moment of well-deserved rest? You yell and curse. Does that acquaintance of yours constantly flaunt clothes, accessories, and poise that your condition does not allow you to match? You are torn with envy and think of ways to make her pay. Trivialities, sillinesses. Yes, much of it is a silliness. They are just sillinesses, sillinesses in which life rots anyway. Also, you like that woman very much, but she denies you. You take her anyway. Is your woman unfaithful? You punish her. Does your family make you uncomfortable? You kill them all. Does a homeless man snatch your handbag? You run over him 3 times with your car. And politics is no longer care for the res publica, even with inevitable lapses and deviations, but solely and essentially, as a rule, an affirmation of one's ego and power to conquer which everything is permissible, starting with the incitement of voters' instincts. Sillinesses. Thus, the world began to slide almost unnoticed into nothingness, while humanity appeared to be at the height of its power. Senseless, irresponsible, and violent anger leads to war. Despair leads to war. Self-centered loneliness leads to war.
Chapter 3: The Forest.
Months, years, everything passes quickly. It was August. She was in the mountains, finally time off. Vacation. Time off. Vacation. What a bad word. Absence. Lack. Emptiness. Using those words to describe a period of time seemed like giving up on life. It's very better to name that time Holy Day. However, every year the work seemed more tiring. Perhaps it was her age. Perhaps it was the many frankly incomprehensible absurdities in which they had caged her work. In any case, it was so, but now she had a few weeks to be finally free. Sitting on the balcony of the house, after a nice walk, she enjoyed the view. Right in front of her, the garden bordered a mountain forest of beech and spruce trees. The obvious lack of maintenance meant that the forest mantle was expanding, first encompassing and then gradually replacing the garden itself, overpowering it with its strength and shade. A young ash tree, in particular, was pushing its foliage over a fig tree, a yellow-flowered carya, and some roses which, in need of light, were leaning towards the center of the garden. She was reminded of a consideration she had often made when observing trees. Although it may seem strange, such beings, at least for the most part, and in any case with regard to all the species typical of stable and resilient forests, need the forest itself in order to be born and to take the first steps of their existence. However, only at the edge or within wide clearings do they reach a majestic bearing. A well-built, balanced and expanded crown with even very low branches. Inside the forest, in fact, each individual suffers competition from its neighbors and its growth is affected. The trees in the forest also shade each other. It would seem that the proximity of one's peers hinders the full and complete affirmation of single individuals. One would say that the proximity of one's fellow beings hinders the full and complete affirmation of individuals. She thought how apt it was to transfer this observation to humanity, because we too are like that. We demand our space so that solitude seems to increase our greatness, our power, our freedom, ultimately, and our full realization. Only thus does our power fully and proudly blossom. Only thus can we grow harmonious and complete, expanding our every branch into the light. Raising her gaze only slightly, however, she could see the entire mountain slope almost completely covered by the stable major forest. Thus, a second and more complete consideration forced itself upon her. In reality, the forest alone shapes the landscape and even significantly influences the climate of the region. A tree, however imposing, beautiful, and majestic, is just a tree. The forest is a complex habitat, the source of incomparably greater biodiversity. Moreover, an isolated tree becomes an easy target for wind, hail, and storms, to the point of being damaged, demolished, and uprooted. So, no individual trees, not single individuals, build landscape and history. This role belongs only to communities, to forests. She thought back to the big sick oak tree. She thought back to the white disease. Above the dark, cool beech forest, whose peace she was observing, a darker blanket of spruces covered the mountain, and she noticed that within it there were patches of brown dryness. The auger beetles were killing the trees. Like the powdery mildew, the auger beetles entered the wood where the wood is alive, just under the bark, and were killing, expanding. The auger beetle entered by taking advantage of an ecological imbalance. Even the forest could die, therefore, but its enormity, its disproportion to a single tree, tended to ensure its survival at least in the medium term. Then a new thought hit her. What about us? We are similar, after all. The idea that lonely self-assertion builds human history is an illusion. Loneliness increases fear and makes us all orphans and without companions. Without true friends, humans who do not degrade themselves to vassals for the sake of convenience. Without love, life is desperate, while brotherhood sustains and corrects. It makes history grow and build. It is the peoples and their cultures that build history, not the arrogance of individuals. This is without prejudice to individual genius, which is all the more brilliant when linked to the people. Seneca's aphorism came back to her.
Nunquam sumus singuli.
Not even in ourselves, in our innermost being, we are ever truly alone. Nunquam sumus singuli, and that destroys us. It does not leave us in peace. The only positive alternative is to accept this diversity. the seemingly incoherent jumble of conflicting drives that struggle within us, together with the diversity of others, because we are all poor people, incapable of coherence. To be able to do this, we need to look beyond ourselves. We have to look for help outside ourselves, beyond ourselves. It is a fact. No one possesses the truth, but, my God, the truth exists. Because white is white and black is black, and they are not the same. And reality exists. It exists outside of the representations that we can make of it. And reality, real reality, peace be upon the weak philosophers, is not an optional extra. For although we do not like to split words with hyphens, our bodies and we ourselves inhabit this universe. Universes towards one, and secundum non datur doesn't exist a second choice. Freedom, if it is not subjugated to a sense, absolute freedom, is first of all a mere illusion bordering on the delirium of omnipotence, dream, and in any case a harbinger of further violence and the need for domination. Perhaps that Cain had no right to his life, to his needs. Perhaps that it would not have been better for Cain to have killed Abel. This lie, disguised as freedom, is the fruit of the apple that our ancestors ate. It is the origin of all evil, of each evil. Our freedom, my freedom, does not exist if it is not linked to that of others, of all others, starting with our neighbors. My freedom must be linked to that of my people, and the freedom of my people must be linked to that of the other peoples. In this way, together, we build history instead of destroying it.
Chapter 4: The Freedom of Love.
Brotherhood, indeed. The brotherhood of those who identify themselves within a people leads to freedom. It can lead to freedom and to peace. But at least one more ingredient is needed. Something else is needed. Something greater is needed. Something truly powerful. Absolute freedom, free of all bonds, does not exist.
Numquam sumus singuli.
We are never alone. This is the lesson of the forest. Absolute freedom is a hymn to arbitrariness and brings with it overpowering caprices, violence, the desire to be the greatest, contempt for others. Rather, the only real possibility of peace is freedom. Yet freedom submitted to a sense that transcends us and brings us together as a people. It must be said better. Love. We have to talk about love. About love. It is a common experience, and she knew it very well. When in the first part of her life she really met someone, then she saw him, she became aware of him and knew him. She got to know him and fell in love with him immediately. She wanted to get married. She wanted to get married, and she got married to make definitive what was. When you think about it, a bond. Just a bond. Perhaps was she freer before? Not at all. She was in the trap of her own incoherence and found herself weak, helpless, incapable, useless. She was caught in the trap that made her wish for death. Then, after that meeting, after that autumn day in that garden, everything changed. She herself had changed. She had changed. She had changed forever. Because within love, everything acquires depth, reason. Everything, but everything, really everything, became rich in meaning. Yes, her life. Her life and even the whole world, all things and all history and all lives took shape. They became and have been from then on something to be explored, to be investigated, to be known better in order to be satisfied. By discovering another, by discovering others, by discovering others through another, she began to enjoy her own life. It was only in love, it was only within love that she became truly free. Free from the suffocating fear of others' judgment, of her own smallness, and above all, free from her own judgment of herself, from her own worthlessness and smallness. She was free from Seneca's malediction, free from the curse that Seneca discovered and described, because he who does not know how to stretch the bow of desire beyond his own horizon is cursed, as Nietzsche put it so well. Her beloved loved her. He cared for her. He appreciated her. He wanted her. So she began to love herself. Her life was valuable to him. So she herself began to see that value. Thus she realized that her life was worth something. Her life was valuable. She looked at herself through his eyes and saw herself for who she was. Poor, miserable, human, yet important, priceless. But because of evil exists a single event, however great and all-embracing, is never final. Rather, it is final because respecting the objectivity of existential well-being demands fidelity and demands everything. Everything all the time, from start to finish, forever. But precisely, fidelity and choice are not archived once and for all, not for men, not for women. Fidelity must be constantly sought, wanted, desired, beyond all falling away, forgetfulness and distraction. It is necessary to continually bring one's life back to the center. We need to be constantly faithful to ourselves. It is necessary to decide, or at least to be stretched to decide in every moment given up to us, to belong to the one who has been experienced as our love. We must to stretch the arc of desire beyond our own limited horizons. We must hope for what is beyond our expectations, because at least once we saw it possible. We saw it for real. It is necessary to rise again and to forgive. It is necessary to forgive one another, remembering that it is our own inability to be consistent and always good that makes love essential to us. As she overheard a friend say, when we detach ourselves from love, we inevitably become more and more like a broken record that repeats itself forever. A kind of malignant fractal that, seeking only its own essential motive, closes itself off from everything. It is an autistic fractal that, starting from its own self-sufficiency, no longer explores anything. It reaches nowhere. It prevents self-respect and opens the way to all angry degradation. To love the one who loved her led her to rediscover love. It took them beyond their own narrow horizons to the point of realizing that beyond the self there is good, and the universe, the universe, makes sense, and this sense is possible because we are loved regardless of ourselves and what we think. Obviously, she was not alluding to the love of romance novels or the hateful, vulgar, and degrading love of certain erotic stories. She was thinking of love, that love which Christians call charity, a virtue. She was thinking about that absurd love that makes you say something unheard of, love your neighbor as yourself. But why should one love like that? How could one love like that? Why and how should one love in this way, except by imitating an even greater love, his love? To show us, in fact, to make it possible for us, the Eternal came among us and died for us without warning us, without asking our consent. He did this without any warning, which was even prophesied, understood, intended, accepted. It was indeed an outrage, a scandal, a colossal scandal. It was the greatest scandal in the history of mankind, and those who did it paid dearly for their insult to convention. He only did it because he loved us. He loved us anyway. He loved the people of that time, including his executioners. He loves each one of us now. Her own falling in love and all the good that came from it made her aware of the existence of an immense love that encompassed everything and in which everything made sense. So she was free for the first time. So she was still free. We only have to look at our children to understand this even better. Growing up does not mean becoming self-sufficient, but belonging. Isn't this, after all, Collodi's Pinocchio lesson? The forest enjoys a community that is functional for its own survival, and therefore exists for the benefit of all its trees and all the other inhabitants for the forest, and also makes the climate and air qualities suitable for an infinite number of organisms, both inside and outside the forest itself. The freedom that is the fruit of the recognition of being loved goes beyond mere survival and any utilitarian aspect. It goes beyond any material benefit, so to speak, to simply open itself to everything and forever. Love creates a people aware of the true reason for their fraternity. Searching for this motive, adhering to it more and more, submitting to it in a fidelity sometimes rejected, but always desired, walking together towards a sense of self and of the world, excludes at its root anger violence. War. It cures white disease, apathy, despair. Yes, without love, without the recognition of love, there's no peace, because you have made us for yourself, O Lord, and our heart is restless until it rests in you.